Thank you so much for the introduction. My name is Andrea Passalacqua. I work at the Fed board, and today I'm very excited to present my project on the real effect of bank supervision, evidence from on-site bank inspection. These are joint work with Paolo Angelini, Francesca Lotti, and Giovanni Soggia from the Bank of Italy. So the user disclaimer applies. The views expressed in this paper are the sole responsibility of the authors, and they don't necessarily reflect those of the Federal Reserve System or the Bank of Italy. So let's move on to the motivation for this project. So we know that a weak banking sector can prolong the stagnation of the economy by creating or failing to correct distortion in the credit market. The type of distortion that I'm going to talk about are misallocation of credit to underperforming firms. And in this extreme case, we end up in the situation of what we call the zombie lending, which is the tendency of undercapitalized banks to keep lending to underperforming firms to keep them alive and avoid writing losses in the balance sheet. There is a growing literature showing that this kind of situation leads to a negative impact to the real economy. And the surprising fact is that even if there are bank regulation and policy in place in order to avoid this kind of situation, this is still a major problem, especially in European continental countries such as Italy, Spain, Portugal. So in this project, what we aim to do is we try to study the impact of bank supervision in reducing distortion in the credit market, and we are trying to do like the extra mile, trying to understand what are the spillover effects for the real economy. Just to give you like an overview of what is bank supervision in Italian banking system. So we have in the Italian banking system, there are mostly like two types of supervisor activity. The first one is off-site inspection. These are periodic communication on balance sheet information from the bank to the supervisor, and all the banks have to comply with it. And this is actually the reason why, like, the Bank of Italy has access to this very rich data set on the loans on the banks because of like this periodic communication. The second type of inspection, which is the main focus of this project, is on-site inspection. And these are unexpected audits at the bank's headquarters. These are very detail-oriented inspection audits that can take on average 64 days with a maximum of under 47 days, at least in my sample. During this inspection, inspectors have access to internal information at the bank, such as email, loan application, any sort of communication between the bank and the firm. And the goal is really to try to assess the quality of the accounting reporting made by the bank, as well as the risk of the loans. And indeed, one of the most common outcomes in this kind of inspection is a reclassification of a loan from good quality to bad quality. In terms of contribution of this paper to the literature, I feel like there are three main, the paper contributes to three main strands of the literature. The first one is on the effect of banks in supervision and monitoring on banks' performance and lending activity. And, compared to other works, the fact that we have access to such a granular data, we are able to, trace, the effect of the inspection, not only at the bank level, but also at the firm and the local economy, studying the potential spillover of this on-site bank inspection. The second strand of the literature we add on is on the huge literature on the credit supply shock and the real economy. And in this case, we, compared to other papers that try to use like a natural shock, such as the Lehman Brothers failure, here we are using a supervisor-induced bank shock, and we are able to uncover an important composition and effect in the credit supply. And the third strand of the literature we add on is the one on zombie lending. As I mentioned before, previous work showed that this problem exists. For instance, Pick and Rosengreen studied this literature studying the role of zombie lending in the Japanese economy. So there are works that show like this problem exists and financial regulation make it worse. What we do is that we try to estimate the relative effect of bank supervision in reducing this problem. I want to touch base a little bit on the data that we have access to, because it's a very rich data set and allows us to do like very interesting analysis. We have data on banks' balance sheet information. We have data on the universe of loans from the credit registry. These are like the universe of loans that are granted to Italian firms, we match this information with information from the universe of corporation from Survey. Survey is kind of like the Italian census, sort of. And then we have this novel data set on on-site bank inspection, which is critical for our analysis. So in this data set, we are able to identify three group of banks. Banks that are not eligible to be inspected, and we can interpret this as too good to be inspected, too healthy to be inspected. And then we have two group of banks. One is the banks that are inspected, and the other one is banks that are eligible to be inspected, but they are not chosen. And the difference between the two is that given like the supervisor use a selection rule that is, and we show that the selection rule is not correlated with the bank's quality, and because of that, we are going to be able to draw some causal inference on the effect of this on-site inspection on banks' performance. The only limitation of this data set is that we have data only on mutual banks, which are similar to cooperative banks in the US. So they are local, they are very small. But if you think from a supervisory point of view, these are the banks that most likely are going to be in trouble if a local economic shock happens, because all the firms are borrowing from the same bank in the local area. And so the bank is going to be facing a lot of troubles if that happens. So bank supervision in this case play a huge critical role for these banks. In terms of analysis, in the paper, we developed three sets of analysis. For each analysis, we have a different empirical strategy. We have the first one, which is the bank level analysis. In this case, we compare banks, inspected banks, to a group of eligible but not inspected banks. And as I mentioned, we take advantage of their quasi-random assignment into the treatment of inspected banks compared to eligible not inspected banks. Then we have a second set of analysis at the loan level. In this case, we are using a very well-known Pajamian type of approach, comparing firms that are borrowing from multiple banks, banks that are inspected and banks that are eligible but not inspected. And in this case, we are able to control for factors affecting the demand of credit, and we are able to isolate the credit supply. And the last piece of analysis is at the firm and the local economy level. And in this case, we are using a Barty instrument. And without getting too much the technicalities, in this case, we are able to take advantage of the exogeneity of the shift share to the outcome variable to draw some causal inference. So what do we find? In terms of a result, at the bank level, we do find that inspected banks are more likely to reveal losses in their balance sheet as a result of an inspection. In particular, we find that following an inspection, there is an increase in the stock of bad loans in the inspected bank's balance sheet. We do also find that inspected banks are more likely to reduce lending in the short term. When we move to the loan level analysis, we do uncover a very interesting compositional effect. And in particular, we find that the drop in the lending activity is driven only by these underperforming, or what we call zombie firms. And indeed, healthy firms don't suffer the credit cut. And in addition to that, we do find that inspected banks are more likely to start new lending relationships with healthier firms. So to sum up, what we find is that as a result of this inspection, inspected banks are more likely to implement more conservative lending policies, And so we were interested to understand the potential mechanisms explaining this kind of result. Why do inspected banks change their lending policies? And so we do find two mechanisms explaining this. The first one is we do find a change in the governance of the bank, and in particular, inspected banks are more likely to replace board members and increase the number of internal supervisors as a result of this inspection. In addition to that, we do find that inspected banks are more likely to raise capital as a result of this inspection, and in this sense, banks are getting more skin in the game. The last piece of analysis focuses on the spillover effects to the real economy, and in particular, we uncovered two sets of results: firm level results and local economy level results. At the firm level, we do find that healthy firms are more likely to have access to more credit, and as a result, they invest more in labor, in fixed asset, and as a result, their sales increase. On the other side, zombie or underperforming firms are not able to replace the credit card that they suffer from inspected banks, and as a result, the total credit goes down, and because of that, they're more likely to exit the market. And in line with this last piece of result, we do find that at the local economy level, local economies that are more exposed to this bank inspection are more likely to experience an increase in the growth rate of new firms, employment, even if in the medium term, even if employment in the short term is actually negative, and in aggregate productivity. So just to sum up, in this project, we studied the role of bank supervision, and in particular, one type of supervisor activity, which is on-site unexpected bank inspection. And we do find that this kind of supervisor activity has a positive direct and indirect effect on supervised banks and the real economy. In terms of policy implication, it's not necessarily true that more bank supervision is good or feasible, because in the short term, it could be potentially costly and politically unfeasible. I don't want, that the takeaway is that more supervision is always good. In the short term, this could be very stressful for the bank's balance sheet. This could result in the disruption of the local economy, increase in employment, as I show in the paper. It's also true that in the long term, there could be a better selection of firms and higher productivity. So the optimal size of bank supervision, it really depends on the policymaker view, on the weight that she puts on the short versus on the long-term view. Thank you so much.